welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us. My name is Nicole Chaucy with ITSM Academy monthly webinar with our longtime friend of the Academy and definitely an expert in his industry and ITIL expert, soon to be managing professional, right? Jeff Jensen, founder and principal of iTrain IT Leaders. So welcome, Jeff. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you very much, Nicole, for giving me the opportunity to be here today.
You're welcome. You're welcome. If you want to just introduce a little bit about yourself, I just told them, of course, how you're a longtime friend of the Academy and an ITSM trainer for us as well.
Yeah, thank you very much. Appreciate all of you joining the webinar today. My name is Jeff Jensen. As Nicole mentioned, I've been associated with ITSM Academy for several years now and have really gained a lot from being a part of all of the new information that's coming, both in the past with previous versions of ITIL, as well as a lot of the work that's gone into the DevOps side of things as well. I'm the founder and principal of iTrain IT Leaders. I do information technology training and consulting, and part of why I chose this topic for the webinar today is really to talk about the Service Management Office. It's a big area that I'm working on to try and help organizations out, to try and put structure around how they can move forward in their digital transformation and their improvement journey. So I thought it would be a good topic to share with everyone today.
Great. Thank you, Jeff. And we're going to go ahead and start with our first poll. So I'm going to go ahead and run that. There we go. If you could, just take a few minutes and fill that out. And I'll just kind of close it up when we've got a pretty good percentage voted. So, got quite a bit already voting. I know it might be early for those West Coast people. They're probably still getting their coffee. All right. I'm going to go ahead and close the polls, and then we'll get the results. Okay. There we go. So we got 42% at yes. Does your organization utilize communities of practice? 42% at yes, 32% at no, and what are those at 26%?
Okay. That's good. Well, we'll go ahead and move forward. We'll talk about those as we go forward in the presentation. So thanks for sharing that, Nicole. And if we're ready, let's go ahead and go forward.
Yep, there you go. You've got the screen, all powerful.
Okay, here we go. So put together a quick agenda for the presentation. I have a bunch of material and a lot of slides in this today, and my intention isn't to go spend a bunch of time on every single one, but a lot of them are there simply from a reference and a comparison standpoint. So starting out, I like to start all of my presentations with the why. Why are we here? Why do we need to talk about what we're talking about? And then I'll get into a little bit of the history of why do, or in some cases maybe did, we have a service management office for the 42-ish% of you that answered yes, and kind of looking at that from more of an ITIL v3 perspective. And then we'll talk about what's changed since then. And I know a lot of the discussion in the ITSM world and with Axelos and ITIL 4 really is talking about the journey from 3 to 4 and what's changed and why do we need to update our thinking and our frameworks and our ways of working and our focus. So we'll talk about that in that context, and then why the SMO needs to evolve to help meet some of those challenges. And then I'm going to provide some of my thinking on the future state of the SMO and what opportunities are out there and what are some of the things that we could be considering have it do that maybe it isn't doing today. And then we'll finish up with a little bit of a summary to encapsulate hopefully everything we've talked about, and then have some time for some Q&A. So gonna get off and running here. So starting with why. The golden circle, hopefully this could have even been a poll question potentially, but understanding how many of you out there in the audience, if we were in a classroom, I would ask you that question, have heard of Simon Sinek, have heard of the golden circle. And really the idea with this is most people when they're talking, or most organizations when they're talking about their offerings or their services, we tend to gravitate toward the what and the how. Here's what we do, and then we get into the details a little bit more about how we do that, but we tend to not spend as much time focusing on the why. And the why is the piece of this that's really the more relatable piece. What's your purpose or cause or belief? And so Simon Sinek basically says in this golden circle model, we need to start with why and make sure that the reason for what we're doing and the purpose and the objective is very clear, and that is what relates us to people. It's our cause or our belief, why we exist, before we get into talking about the how and the what, and that makes us a lot more successful in terms of what we're trying to communicate or present. For me, as I was mentioning a little bit in the introduction, I've been working from a consulting perspective, trying to help organizations with this idea of a service management office. And my primary client that I'm working with right now really is in a situation where they're working through digital transformation. They have a lot of different parts of the organization working in different types of organizational structures and organizational models. And we really are trying to break down some of those silos and try and put together more of that true end-to-end operating model, and having more of that horizontal flow and looking at the true end-to-end perspective when we're looking at things. And so when we look at the SMO, it's really about, do we have some type of structure, whether we call it an SMO or whether we call it something else, that can maybe help facilitate and help drive some of those things. So I want to talk about, why did we have a service management office? And I pulled some information, and Donna Knapp, I want to give credit to her. She helped me with this presentation, pulling together some of the slides for this. From a presentation that, if you go back into the ITSMacademy.com webinar archives, this is maybe back on page 37 or something like that. Actually, it's not quite that far, but it's from about 4 years ago or so, that Jane Grohl put together. So there's a presentation out there that talks about the service management office and why do you need one, or what's the point of standing one up. And that's out there if you're interested in seeing some of the historical part of this. So we define the SMO from that presentation's perspective as an internal team that's accountable for the quality of the service management program. We also found, I think, a little bit more information, maybe even a little bit better explanation of the service management office that we pulled from the Navia.com site. They have a link here that I posted in the presentation, talking about the SMO as a center of excellence within your organization. And it's about taking a look at, what are the things that we need to do to help us deliver our services more efficiently and more effectively with the right level of quality? And we're leveraging those industry standards and best practices and applying them. So you get into that idea of adopt and adapt. So we liked that definition from this site as well, and that's out there linked if you're interested in reading more of that content. Some other pieces from that initial presentation, our objectives of the SMO. I won't go through all of these, but it really is about a lot to do with governance and trying to have things rolled up at an enterprise level. How do we define and implement our processes, and how do we improve? Really looking at things from having a place for our process owners or our process areas to live within the organization. We're defining and implementing and managing processes. We're making sure we have the right interfaces and dependencies. We're aligned and integrated with changing business needs. We're managing communications and training, making sure that we have the right subject matter expertise as part of our SMO that we can then use to teach other people how to fish, hopefully. And then coordinating some of our bigger efforts, maybe part of the CAB. One of the things that is talked about in that previous presentation is the service desk. Should it report to the SMO? And again, the continual improvement focus that should be there. And here's the structure. So again, if you don't have an SMO, the question that the presentation asks is, where do your process owners live, right? Where do the people that are running incident management or running change management or running problem management, where's their home in the organization? Maybe they're part of a service desk, maybe they're part of operations or infrastructure, but the idea is that you should have some type of a structure that reports directly into your CIO. And that gives you the opportunity to then have that seat at the table and be looking across all of the different technology towers or all of the other different vertical functions in your organization, and having the ability to provide that end-to-end view, and hopefully that focus on value and focus on continual improvement and rolling up things from more of an enterprise perspective, as well as making sure that our processes hopefully stay fit for purpose. So that's that structure. Okay, that's the historical part of where we've been. I want to talk a little bit about what's changed. And if you think about this in the context of ITIL v3 to ITIL 4, that's one of the questions that we ask when we teach the classes, is you think about what's changed since ITIL v3 came out in 2007 and then had its 2011 update within technology and within IT, right? So we have these new increasing challenges, and I've got a slide that I pulled from one of the training slides that talks about that coming up here, but we also obviously have seen a big increase in the prevalence of additional best practice frameworks, and we'll talk about that. The other interesting thing that I've seen change from a consulting perspective is we've taken on much more of a product-based focus, and you see that within Agile, you see that within DevOps, taking a look at things from more of a product model versus just a project focus. And then the question is still becomes then, what about the services? Where do the services fit into that equation? And then we've obviously had, as a part of bringing on these new best practice frameworks and changing our ways of working, we have some team and structural changes that have happened, right? We have Agile self-organizing teams. If we're doing Agile at an enterprise level, we have things like scaled Agile framework that are out there, and I'm going to spend a few slides talking about how that fits into the picture. And then from a DevOps perspective, if any of you have taken DevOps leader class from ITSM Academy or DevOps Institute, you have the Spotify model that's out there, and taking a look at maybe how that type of a hybrid approach that kind of builds on what some of the other previous hybrid models are that are out there might fit into the equation. So we have a lot of changes. Increasing business IT challenges. Again, I won't read through all these, but just if you skim through this should look really familiar to everyone. We see these challenges, right? We have the increase in speed as being a primary focus, and we have that focus on not just taking a look at time to market, but really are we realizing value to our customer? And we have a lot of things around Internet of Things, big data and intelligent data. Are we doing things to really not just have basic customer satisfaction and meeting our SLAs, but are we actually having the right customer experience and that customer delight perspective? So, customer expectations, we're used to working with the leading edge technology companies like our Amazons and our Googles and our Netflixes. We have those app mentalities, and it's realizing this top bullet, which is really the most important thing, is that we can't continue to have this separation between IT and the business. We really have to look at everything as being, we're all on the same team and part of the same thing, and we can't be working in our silos or being disconnected anymore. Okay, so we have the prevalence of these new or increasingly visible best practices. And part of what I wanted to do, I pulled this from another presentation I gave in the past, is just making sure everybody kind of starts at a basic level if you aren't clear on what a best practice is or what the intention of it is. I pulled a definition off the internet from Business Dictionary. It's a method or technique that has consistently shown results superior to those achieved with other means and that is used as a benchmark. See also best in class and leading practice. So we have these different practices, lean, agile, DevOps, ITSM, that are all trying to ultimately, if we're doing them right, achieve the same thing, which is value to our service consumer or to our customer or whoever our stakeholders are. And the point of utilizing best practices from my perspective is the second diagram, which is we want to try and straighten out this squiggly line curve, right? We talk about the path to success is never a straight line. Ideally, best practices can help us at least straighten out those curves and straighten out the line and shorten the distance, because we are benchmarking. We're not just trying to reinvent the wheel or start from scratch, or having people that have been in their jobs for a long time and feel like they have gotten there and they've earned it and they know what they need to know, and so we'll figure it out, right? We want to not have just that perspective, but we need to be a learning organization and have our leadership be open to learning new things and learning new practices and ways of working. I put a slide in here just to describe the 4 areas that I talked about there. I'm not going to spend a lot of time again in this presentation. A lot of you probably know all this already, but in case there's any newer people that are new to IT or new to these best practices, I wanted to just put a brief definition on what these are. So I've got lean, agile, DevOps, and IT service management defined, and that's there for you to refer to and look at if you're not familiar with those different best practice frameworks. And I also want to introduce a little bit about scaled agile framework. So the organization I'm doing my consulting with is doing a very large scale implementation of SAFe. And really what the SAFe model is trying to look at things from an end-to-end perspective of the life cycle of developing software and systems. And a lot of the things that you see here are very analogous to some of the things you'll see from an overall Agile and Scrum perspective. You've got some things listed in here from a DevOps perspective that you can kind of see here at the program level. And then you've got different pieces that you decompose from the high level funnel and strategic themes and putting together your portfolio view. You then get into the solution view, and then you get into more of the program view and then the team view. And the idea is that as you decompose, all these things potentially go through different views of putting together Kanbans or backlogs, taking a look and making sure that things like NFRs are accounted for. You've got different roles associated, and then you've got different pieces on the outside, as well as different pieces of the leadership that help you implement all of this model. So if you haven't seen this before, it's interesting to kind of take a look at from a couple of perspectives. One is, can this help you do Agile or do things from a DevOps perspective more at scale? And can you adopt and adapt that into your organization? But also, as you see on here, we have this idea of some of these things that are on the left side. And one of those things, you look at metrics, you look at shared services, you look at milestones and roadmaps and visions, et cetera. But you have this idea of the COP, or the communities of practice. And that's where I see one of the many opportunities, besides just looking at it from a process or a practice standpoint, that we can interface with something like this. So in my next slide, I talk about communities of practice. So Scaled Agile Framework defines these communities of practice as kind of this Venn diagram of looking at how we bring these pieces together. What's the domain, or what do we care about? What are the different practices? What do we do together? And then who's in our community and who cares about it? And it really can be anybody that has an interest across the organization in trying to help improve things or trying to mature practices and ways of working in the organization. And SAFE talks about the fact that there can be different types of communities of practice. You can have role-based communities of practice, and you can also have topic-based communities of practice. So depending on how you're organized or what you need to do to adapt this to putting together the right teams and the right collaboration and putting together even inputs into improvement in your Kanban board, having these communities of practice plays a very strong role. And we're seeing that with the client I'm working with as far as setting up some lean and agile communities of practice and getting the right people working together. The other piece that I wanted to introduce, and again, if you've taken any of the DevOps Institute classes, especially the DevOps Leader class, you'll have seen this before, is this idea of the Spotify model. So we have the ideas of squads, tribes, chapters, and guilds. And if you look at the squad, that really is your typical Scrum or Agile team. You've got your 2 pizza box team with your Scrum Master and your product owner. And then we organize at the tribe level around different capabilities or feature sets or functionality to group those like squads together at more of that program or more of that larger level. And then the next piece is the chapter. So this is more of the line management piece. We look across our tribe or look across our multiple tribes and our different squads, and how do we still have some commonality and some management structure and some performance indications of how people are doing, and how do we do that across these chapters. And so the chapter lead or the manager or the line management, that HR interface goes through the chapter. And then we have this idea of a guild. And if I go to the next slide, we talk about the guild structure a little bit more. So it's basically similar to a community of practice or a community of interest. It's a group, it cuts across the organization, anybody can join it. Examples are listed here: Agile coaches, product owners, tribe leads. It could be other practice areas like I mentioned in the SAFE perspective around either different roles or different topics. And part of the goal is networking too, right? We're not just staying within our silos, but we really are trying to have that continual learning and improvement and experimentation across our different teams and our squads and our tribes. So that's what a guild is, and hopefully I explained that well and that makes sense to everybody. The other thing I want to bring to the table, and I'll talk a little more later in the presentation about ITIL 4, is this idea of all these new ITIL 4 practices. When we talk about a community of practice, not saying in the new structure, and for those of you that have seen this before, you understand how we've transitioned from looking at things just as processes from ITIL v3 to a broader perspective of a practice. So we have this ITIL 4 definition of a practice as a set of organizational resources designed for performing work or accomplishing an objective. It's bigger than just the process, right? The process is the set of interrelated activities that transforms inputs and does work on them and then has some type of an output that's delivered to some type of a customer, and hopefully that's adding value, and those processes are enabling our service delivery. We have these larger ITIL 4 practices, and we split those into these 3 areas. The question or the thing to think about, without getting into too much detail on this, is does it make sense for us to look at these as potential opportunities, not just to have communities, but also, and I'll talk about this a little bit later, having our process owners and process managers help those tribes and squads, or help those interfaces within the SAFE model to make this more of a community type of an exercise, and to go be transformational leaders and servant leaders to help those teams decentralize and do these processes better. And we'll talk about what's changed as a part of that coming up here. So hold that thought, and we'll get into ITIL 4 a little bit more later. So expanding the definition. So again, I talk about the idea of a guild. It could be very similar to, again, a community of practice and SAFE, or we'd call it a community of interest. We also hear terminology of things like centers of excellence. So the question is, are those essentially synonymous things? And the question that's the bigger question, is kind of why I put this rowboat diagram in here, is who's coordinating all these various communities? Do we have some type of organizational structure that can support the common goals and objectives, and provide structure and prioritization and standardization and accountability across those teams, so that we're not just talking about things, but we're actually seeing improvements coming out of those different communities or out of that guild model? And I look at that as an opportunity potentially for something like our service management office to step forward and lead around that. So here's some of my immediate thought and guidance around what I've talked about so far. I think if you don't have an SMO-like function, you need one. And it really comes down to whether you call it that or whether you call it something else. You need to have something in your organization that's helping to bring those different communities together and provide focus, and even roll up the good ideas that maybe can impact more than just one team or one functional area. If you have a service management office, more based on what we've done in the past and from an ITIL v3 perspective, the question is it still effective? Maybe it is. Maybe you're still seeing value from that process governance and roll up of enterprise metrics and helping to do those things. But my question is making sure that we're not just focused on running processes, but are we really facilitating the business outcomes and the customer outcomes that we should be in our role as an SMO? So my view is that the SMO shouldn't just be another community of practice, one of many. It's not just something that maybe we have a group that talks about traditional ITSM or just incident, problem, and change. We need to use this as a potential opportunity to break down siloed organizational structures and not have siloed tools and siloed metrics. It's an opportunity for us in the ITSM space in particular, and if we have an SMO or are looking at forming an SMO or can kind of attach ourselves to that type of a structure in our organization, to step up and lead. And that's really the call to action that I have for everybody as part of this webinar, is look at the opportunities that you maybe have to do that. Why the SMO needs to evolve. We've talked about this a little bit already, but this is maybe calling out some of those pieces in a little more detail. We've got to expand our focus from what it traditionally has been in the ITIL v3 world. I think there's a big opportunity as organizations are going through decentralization, and especially as they're moving to autonomous teams and self-organized teams and moving to more of a decentralized model. We need to have this mentality of you build it, you own it, you run it. We have functions and team members like SREs in our teams potentially that are trying to be part of that team and trying to do some of that operational piece of bringing Dev and Ops together and being proactive with problem management and building in quality. And speed, again, is a primary metric. So we need speed, but we also need it with quality and with stability. Do we have a larger entity that's looking across all of the work that we're doing and seeing how we're performing and reporting on that? That's an opportunity. We talk a lot in different classes about optimizing before we automate. We need to do both, right? Are our processes and our practices optimized? Are we doing our work holistically and really looking across the organization end to end and even looking at value streams, which we'll talk about? Or are we basically doing the definition of insanity? Do we have the same practices and the same work going on, and are we still siloed in our organization, and are we expecting different results as a result of doing the same thing? So my argument is we need to take a look at things from a bigger picture perspective and change how not just we think coming into our teams, but also how does our overall organization align, and how do we think about making sure we're delivering value to our customers. A little bit about framework alignment. I think that the SMO can help achieve framework alignment. The idea here is we all should know no single best practice framework is perfect. There aren't any silver bullets. We don't want local optimization. We need to think about things horizontally end to end and how do we optimize. And then what about the customer, right? If we're doing continuous delivery or continuous deployment, is that in cadence with our customers and kind of separating that deployment from release? Are we focused on feature deployment in our software development models, or are we really focused on business outcomes? And then do we have the right feedback loops with our customers? Are we doing not just things like solution demos, but are we really following up and thinking end to end about how value is really being co-created, right? And that's kind of the next opportunity where you bring in ITIL 4. We bring in the concept of value co-creation. We talk about value, outcomes, costs, and risks, and not only just doing a good job of documenting those outcomes, costs, and risks up front, but then we are making sure that as business conditions change and customer requirements change, we're keeping those things in front of us. All right, so the future state of the SMO. This is kind of my big laundry list of all the things that we've talked about and the things that I think we can go and do and lead in this space. And again, you might already have in your organization some of this already taken care of and it's going on. And maybe the SMO helps align those pieces, or maybe you're not doing some of these things and this is a huge list and we can't do all of these things all at the same time, so it's adopt and adapt. Take a look at where maybe you can add some value by doing these things. I always like to start with continual improvement, but I also think there's opportunities from a cultural perspective that the SMO can help with too. So leadership for digital transformation, I put SMO and I also put /VRO. So one of the other names or other things I've seen in organizations is this idea of a value realization office. So same type of idea, maybe they're the same thing, maybe they're complementary pieces. In the organization I'm consulting with, the VRO really is about the software development lifecycle and focused on putting together the SAFE model and doing the SAFE focus, and can we align to that? But in any case, you need that structure to do that transformational leadership and to drive that culture change. I mentioned earlier, can we provide the structure and the standards and the governance for all the different communities of practice and lead those communities of practice? Almost the same idea of having a scrum of scrums, right? You're kind of bringing those pieces together and encouraging sharing and transparency and automation. I've got sharing on there twice, I just noticed. We need to share more. That's why that's on there twice. Okay, we need to align our best practices like I mentioned. And one of the things I'll talk about here in a minute is using guiding principles. And we have common guiding principles across these different best practices that we can use to help align and address some of our cultural changes that we want to see. Value stream mapping facilitation is a big part of what the SMO should become good at and be able to offer as a capability into the organization. And can we tie that in with some of our practices around ITIL 4, service value system and service value chain? Okay, talk about continual improvement approach across the enterprise as part of value stream mapping that helps lead to that, but some other things we can do are listed here, especially looking at things at an enterprise level, driving improvement backlogs with continual improvement. Can we then automate via continual improvement? Being a coordination point for service owners. Do we have service owners in our organization or similar types of roles like product owners or solution managers or release train engineers or solution train engineers, et cetera? And then within our own roles, we need to become subject matter experts if we're part of the SMO and all these things that we're talking about. And then the bottom line, value co-creation focused. Are we talking about value outcomes, costs and risks, speed with quality with stability? Are we helping to be a leader and helping to drive that transformation and making sure that those things are working through our service delivery and that that value co-creation is ultimately being created? Okay, so I'm gonna break those down and talk about a few of these different pieces in a little more detail. So again, I talked about this idea of the VRO or the Value Realization Office. Do we have leadership for our digital transformations? And part of the communities of practice model, again, as I mentioned, shouldn't just be that we're there taking a look at this from the standpoint of just being another one of them or being a community of practice that just talks or shares ideas, but it really is driving transformation and driving improvement. So can we provide structure and standards and governance there, and then driving the culture change through our guiding principles? So I pulled this slide from the DevOps Leader class from Transformational Leadership. So we've got a definition and some content here that I won't, again, get into too much detail. This is on here for you guys to refer to, or if you've taken the class, or if you haven't taken the class, I highly recommend it. This really gets into what you need to do to lead a DevOps transformation. So the definition here, I'll just read real quickly. It's the model in which leaders inspire and motivate followers to achieve higher performance by appealing to their values and sense of purpose, facilitating wide-scale organizational change. And so the class distinguishes between the idea of being a servant leader and a transformational leader. And ultimately you want to do both, but the transformational leader is really getting out there and being inspirational and motivational. You're creating followers. You have that vision. You have that why. You have a reason for having people want to follow you down that path, and then you can get into all of the organizational change management practices and some of the other pieces that are out there. And I think it's a huge opportunity, again, for the SMO to step up and lead. Okay, I want to spend a couple of slides talking about guiding principles. So guiding principles, I think, are one of the really cool things that are a part of ITIL as it's moved forward. These were in ITIL Practitioner. For those of you that were able to take that class, they're a big part of ITIL 4 moving forward. And we talk about things as principles. They're underlying truths that don't change over time. Quote from Mary Poppendick, who's the co-author of Lean Software Development. Again, we're trying to take a look at guiding principles as recommendations across the organization to provide guidance in all circumstances. So how do we adopt that service-oriented approach, and how do we adapt these best practices to our specific needs and circumstances? And again, we want to use multiple methods. It's not just picking a framework and expecting it to be the silver bullet. So I wanted to show the commonality with these different frameworks and their guiding principles. So on here I have the Lean guiding principles, right? And first thing on here, defining value precisely from the perspective of the end customer, and then using value streams, which come from Lean, to take a look at what we can do to increase the amount of value-added work and to eliminate waste. And then taking a look at our speed and our flow, looking at pull methods so we don't have too much work in progress, which also creates waste, using Kanban, and then pursuing perfection is a goal. Not that we ever get there, of course, but trying to look at our opportunities to get better. And I'll refer to that a little bit more. Okay, Agile Manifesto. Hopefully all of you have seen Agile Manifesto. If you haven't, it's basically saying we value the things on the right, but the things on the left should be more important, right? We don't want to get too bogged down in process or documentation or just following the plan when we know how fast things are changing in our world today. So some common things again from Agile. DevOps Values, right? We have this acronym in DevOps called CALMS, which stands for Culture, Automation, Lean, Measurement, and Sharing. And looking at it especially as a cultural movement and not just being focused on the tools and technology pieces of DevOps, which are awesome and which are really allowing us to change our ways of working, but making sure we're bringing the organization on the journey and focusing on the people, because as all of you know, that's the most important part. Okay, so we have this CALMS acronym, and also from the Phoenix project, we have the DevOps 3 ways. So we have the first way, which is flow. We have the second way, which is feedback and creating those short feedback loops so we can continuously improve. And then we have experimentation and learning. Again, opportunity for the SMO to foster these cultural elements, especially around taking a look at things from a bigger picture and an end-to-end perspective, and making sure that we are fostering the culture that allows us to experiment and to take risks and to take a look at practicing those things so we get better at them. Okay, and then for those of you that haven't seen these yet, these are the ITIL 4 guiding principles. So you've got focus on value, start where you are, progress iteratively with feedback, collaborate and promote visibility, think and work holistically, keep it simple and practical, optimize and automate. And the idea here is you should see a lot of familiar things that we just reviewed within Lean and Agile and DevOps embedded in these ITIL 4 guiding principles, and that's on purpose. First one again at the top is focus on value. Again, if we just even coming out of ITIL 4 foundation training, or even if you haven't taken that training, just getting these ideas in front of your organization, even sticking them on people's desks to refer to, or whatever adaptation of these that you want to use that fit into what you're trying to accomplish and into your organizational culture and strategy. Use these things. It's an opportunity to immediately add value by seeing how you're doing in these different areas and assessing and seeing what you can do to improve. So using these can really be a good push to drive that cultural change that we're trying to do and to align to our ways of working. Okay, next slide is about value stream mapping. I mentioned this earlier as one of the things I think the SMO can help with. It's my expectation that if I were running an SMO or creating one from scratch, that my process owners and process managers know how to do value stream mapping and how to facilitate that. That would be a mandatory thing from my point of view. So we talk about value streams and how do we create this strategic macro level view through our path from initial customer demand to value. So I've got a couple of slides from value stream mapping, and these were pulled from DevOps Leader class as well. We define value streams, the sequence of activities required to design, produce, and deliver a specific product or service, and we're looking across spanning multiple organizations, functions, and processes. So the value stream is more of the high-level strategic piece, and then our processes and how we take a look at the work that's being done, and then even getting into the procedures and work instructions with the what we do can be part of making sure that we're understanding the value stream, and then where do we have activity that's not value added and where do we have waste because we're waiting for something to get done, or we have handoffs or delays or reports that aren't needed, right? One of the statistics I heard at one of the ITSM conferences I went to earlier this year was that it's about 10% of IT work that is value added and the rest is waste. So if you think about that, we have huge opportunities to use value stream mapping and to take a look at how we're performing in this space. And there should be some very quick wins, especially when we look across different teams and looking at our ways of working to make some improvements. So taking a look at how can we visualize not just current state, but also putting together that future state in terms of our flow of work and information, where do we have waste, and then much like we would do with any type of continual improvement activity, we create some type of a register or a backlog where we prioritize our improvements, we figure out what we're going to work on. That could be a Kanban board too. Measure those improvements as we get things to done and continue to iterate and improve. So value stream mapping, I think, is a huge thing that I would expect a future state SMO to be not just proficient in, but to really lead, to facilitate, and to become a subject matter expert around. And then here's a slide that just talks about a little bit more of the difference between the strategic piece with value stream mapping versus the tactical and operational pieces of continual process or any other type of more tactical continual improvement. So taking a look across things from a systems thinking perspective, more of that bigger transformative piece, significant radical change versus that smaller daily iterative incremental gradual pieces. Taking a look at things across organizations versus more within organizations or functions potentially, although I'd maybe argue that processes definitely should be working and should have some consistency across organizations too. All right. And then we have the ITIL 4 continual improvement model. So we're kind of taking things from value streams to continual improvement. And if I'm a process owner or a process manager or I'm part of an SMO, I need to be well versed in this too. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about it. Hopefully most of you are familiar with it. I've got it on here, or you can definitely ask and learn more about this model. The thing that's changed with ITIL 4 is we really have this idea of taking action here on this bottom part. And how do we execute those improvement actions as we're going forward in the model, and calling that out more specifically. And again, this can be very agile, very iterative, and it should be, right? We shouldn't be just going off and doing a process improvement and disappearing for 6 months and then coming back and moving everybody's cheese, so to speak, and making these huge changes. So that's built into some of the Agile process owner training and some of the other pieces that are out there. Okay, another way to look at things, bringing in some more lean again, is this idea of the Improvement Kata. So you can use any of these models, figure out what works best for you or what your organization's more familiar with. But we can bring in the concept of lean, and it's very similar, right? Understanding that longer term vision or direction, what's the current condition, making sure we work through, where do we want to be with that next target condition, and then plan, do, check, act, and continue to iterate, continue to improve. And make sure we're focusing on learning as a part of that too, and following that long term. And again, how do we roll those things up and look across the organization where we're trying to do these improvement opportunities? My answer is something like an SMO should be helping with that. Okay, and then a final slide. I think the SMOs can help the communities of practice coordinate continual improvement. So this slide really is taking a look at, everybody in the organization needs to be part of continual improvement. Can we play a leadership role in embedding that into the way people think and work? We can have our different teams, maybe across our guilds or across our communities of practice. And then how do we involve everyone, including our partners and suppliers, because they're obviously a part that we don't want to forget about either. And then another area, I mentioned the idea of having the SMO be involved with focusing on speed, right? We talked about speed with quality, with stability. One of the pieces that I really like from the ITSM for DevOps class that Donna shared with me is this idea of process acceleration. How do we get to a more automated, collaborative approach, right? The whole point of automation is really we want to get the low risk, repetitive, non-thinking types of tasks out of the people work that we're doing and have our team members be able to focus on more at the knowledge level and developing wisdom and really being able to, take on the bigger challenges that require the deeper levels of thinking. So how do we break out of our silos and look at how we can do this from an end-to-end perspective? That's where value stream mapping and continual improvement can help us as well. And then how can we leverage automation, manage the associated change, make sure we're not introducing too much change fatigue by doing a bunch of changes all at once, and even the idea of taking that forward to become more of an organization that's change resilient. So this slide talks about some of the techniques. I added experimentation onto here to kind of bring that piece in, but really taking a look at bringing together all these different pieces that we've been talking about: improving flow, reducing waste, shifting left, driving down authority to the right levels in our organization. And that becomes then the opportunity for us as leaders and managers to be that transformational leader and to help be that visionary and not just managing day-to-day work. Let's empower our teams to do that and then help point the direction. And kind of the final piece on this, make it easy for people to do the right thing, right? We have a lot of disparate teams, different siloed functional structures. We have different tools that we're using depending on if we're on the dev side or the ops side. Part of what I think we can take the opportunity to do as part of our SMO structure is to take a look at things holistically, see if we have the opportunity to do basic API calls so that if we're already doing work, and this even applies to SAFe as well, right? If we're already doing something like program increment planning, why aren't we making our release plan and our change authority for the larger release plan part of the work we're already doing? Because we're already authorizing things and making schedules and making commitments and estimating our work and doing all that anyway. Let's automate that. Let's align those different practices. Let's get our tools to support that so we can link those different records or user stories or decisions in our backlogs and things like Jira over to ServiceNow or whatever tool we're using so that we can have that linkage. And that's a big opportunity that I think a lot of organizations want to do, but it's work and it's hard. And we need to make the time and have some dedicated focus to do those things. And again, potential opportunity, I think a good opportunity for something like an SMO to help with. Okay, so I've talked quite a lot so far. I just have a few more slides to go, but as we continue to evolve and we maybe are doing some of those things that I talked about up front, what are some additional pieces that the SMO can do? Talk about, again, opportunity to align our best practice frameworks. And really, again, it's all of them. It should be Agile and Lean and DevOps and ITIL 4 and, right, and this and that. The more you know, and the more you have the opportunity to be bringing those things into your organization and then adopting and adapting, right? Find the solution that's actually going to deliver the value and help you co-create value with your customers and achieve those outcomes that you want. I mentioned earlier the idea of being a coordination point for service owners, or again, whatever roles, product owners, solution managers, et cetera, in your organization, right? We need to still have those. Typically in an SMO, we don't have those roles reporting directly in, they're more dotted line. They live in the technical or the product organizations. So we can still facilitate a lot of the work they're doing and make sure we have that consistency and that opportunity to improve across the board. And then I mentioned the SMO personnel that do report in. So typically in kind of the org design that I've been looking at has 3 roles. It has process owners, it has process managers, and it has some type of a business or reporting analyst role to help gather data and process data and work on rolling up enterprise metrics and doing improvement focus. Those roles really need to break out of their silo and go embed themselves into the squads and the tribes and be those transformational leaders and servant leaders. And I think these are the things that you have to become subject matter experts in if you're going to be in the future state SMO. I mentioned ITIL 4, and we've got the future upcoming intermediate levels with managing professional and strategic leader designations. You need to have not even just one person, I'd argue multiple people in your SMO, if you can get them there over time, that have that level of expertise. You need to have some understanding of ITSM for DevOps. I represented some of those slides in my content. You need to be able to, again, do value stream mapping facilitation. Those are probably the big 3. And then in addition, you need to be able to do process design and process improvement. So certified process design engineer is a class that Don and App authored the book on and is updating, I know. So that's exciting to hear about. We have certified Agile process owners, and our process owners in an SMO need to be Agile. They need to understand these different aspects that I've sub-bulleted here. Our practice or our process objectives need to be aligned to the organization's strategic objective. That's something to baseline yourself against, is do we have that alignment? Do we understand our overall vision and measurements and that alignment across teams? Again, enterprise reporting and metrics roll-up I've talked about. Are we rolling up various dashboards, and are we focused on business outcomes with our metrics? And then as a process owner, you really need to have that SIPOC, that understanding of suppliers, your inputs, your process activities, your outputs, and your customers for each of your process. Are those documented, and not just as one time activity, but as your processes are hopefully being leaned out and are maturing, we need to keep those up to date. Another piece out of the Capo class is the idea of everybody needs to have an elevator pitch so they can very clearly describe why their process, or even as we move forward, our practice is important and how it adds value. I mentioned vision to measurements, and we need to make sure we're role modeling, having those continual improvement backlogs and acting on those. And again, it's ultimately all about value co-creation, right? What can we do to co-create value with our customers? It's not just about us doing things from a transactional perspective, but we're taking that feedback and we're improving what we do in our service offerings and in our service delivery by getting that feedback and having those shared interactions across all of our customers and continuing to learn. Value outcomes, costs, and risks, making sure that maintenance of that is a primary focus, and then speed with quality with stability. So repeating a lot of those themes, but I think it's really important to try and ingrain that as we think about our SMO. So I've got a final piece here with just a few slides on ITIL 4. So I talked about value co-creation. Again, it's not just the mono-directional flow. We look at value outcomes, costs, and risks. And ideally, the supported outcomes and the costs removed and the risks removed is greater than the affected outcomes being negative potentially, or introducing additional costs and risks. And that's really the overall construct of value and value co-creation for ITIL 4 if you haven't seen that before. We have concepts around the service value system, and again, how we bring all these pieces together. If we're moving into ITIL 4 and wanting to utilize these very much improved structures and models that it brings to us, our SMO needs to be experts in all these things. We need to know the guiding principles. We still need to provide that enterprise governance. We need to understand the flow from a value stream mapping perspective, from opportunity and demand to value. We need to understand how our practices can help support our models and deliver the value through utilizing those throughout the value chain and throughout the system, and then that bigger focus on continual improvement. And one of the things I like about ITIL 4 is continual improvement's part of the service value system. It's a service value chain activity, which you see here, and it's also a practice. So inside of that service value system is the service value chain. We have these sets of activities that we do throughout the course of potentially going from demand to value. And we might do one or two of these things. We might do all of these things. We might do them more than once. So it's not something that you think about as just a waterfall approach or a life cycle approach per se, but you could be iterating through doing multiples or all these. And that's how you can create or use this model to create value streams. So I've kind of got my own version of the squiggly line diagram where you can take these potential multiple paths from engage to plan to maybe design, to re-engage, and then obtain and build, and then maybe we improve, and then maybe we deliver value, right? Or whatever that looks like is the idea there. If you haven't seen that before, I wanted to share that really quick. The other thing that we bring to the table is this idea of the 4 dimensions. This has evolved from people, process, technology to the 4 Ps in ITIL v3 with adding in partners. And then we've really got this now expanded out to take a look at these areas. We've got organizations and people, we've got information and technology, partners and suppliers, value streams and processes. So when we talk about value streams and processes, we spend a lot of time talking there. We've got to make sure we're having a holistic approach and really thinking about all these different 4 dimensions. And of course, as I mentioned, the most important one is our organizations and our people if we're undergoing this improvement journey and going through potentially this digital transformation work that we're doing. And again, here's the certification scheme for ITIL 4. We've got these intermediate classes being announced and coming soon. The Managing Professional Transition Bridge class is coming up for ITSM Academy on September 30th. Hopefully a lot of you are familiar with that or moving forward with that. If you've hit that 17 credit or ITIL expert level, your SMO and your process owners or your leaders in that construct need to be at these levels so that they can lead and bring these best practices as well as the Agile and the Lean and the DevOps pieces together and be able to teach the rest of your organization how to fish, go observe directly and go to Gemba. If you look at it from a Lean perspective, embed yourselves with those teams doing that work and help them. And this is a way to help do that. All right, summary, made it, the last slide. This is what I'm semi-humorously calling the SMO Manifesto, the things that in summary I think the SMO of the future needs to do. So again, we have opportunities to drive the digital and cultural transformation, lead the communities of practice, not just be a part of them. Facilitate value stream mapping and drive continual improvement. Make sure we are developing the right subject matter expertise in our SMO roles and really look at ITIL 4 as an opportunity to improve and bring things together, break down silos, look at the path of demand to value, use value streams and create those within that construct and become those leaders at a managing professional and strategic leader level. And again, it requires the transformational leadership. We've got to have the understanding of vision and measurements. We've got to have the right top-down support. I still think in the future, the SMO needs to report directly into the C-level. It can't be buried somewhere else in just the operations part of the organization. And we need to make sure we have that customer-focused outside-in perspective. We need that strong emphasis on continual improvement. We need to make sure we have systems thinking approach, which ITIL 4 helps bring to the table. We're integrating horizontally across value streams. We're breaking down silos, as I mentioned. And ultimately, what can we do to increase our focus on value co-creation and outcomes? And that's really what it's all about. It's not about us. It's not about IT. It's about the customer. That hasn't changed. If anything, I think we need to emphasize that even more.